Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Salvador Barragan from Data Meeting. I'm the Director of Data Governance for Data Meeting. Today, we're going to discuss active data governance and how it's used in Alation. So Alation is a tool that is used to catalog all your items throughout your organization, making sure that you're able to find your data, making sure that your data is of a certain level, high quality, empowering data stewards, etc. So a lot of times when we think of data governance, we think of a large program that has to be instituted in your organization. But what we're working with Alation on really is the ability now to apply data governance within the Alation product, within the Alation environment. And Alation has developed a framework that enables us to both use Alation and also to institute data governance. So that, in essence, is the topic of discussion today. But before I continue further, I'd just like to introduce the presenters. Oh, first the agenda. So we'll discuss a little bit about Data Meeting, who we are, discuss what Alation is, what Alation does, what data governance, active data governance is, and then how we apply data governance in Alation. So as part of that, we're going to discuss data strategy, how data strategy is used within Alation, data policies, data quality, data lineage, data stewardship, workflows within Alation, and at the last section, we're going to discuss a little bit about change management, really a very key area that is required in order to really ensure that your Alation implementation with data governance really is successful. And after that, we'll be demoing each of these sections after each one of those sections. So we'll have a demo as part of that, and then after that, we'll do a Q&A, take anybody's questions at that time. So the presenters today, as I said, my name is Salvador Barragan. I'm the Director of Data Governance here at Data Meeting. My associate is Sean Glenn. He will be leading the demos throughout our presentation. So let's start off with who Data Meeting is. So Data Meeting is a small boutique business intelligence consulting firm. It provides end-to-end BI solutions. It has consultants around the globe. We have consultants in Brazil, India, the United States. We have a large footprint both in the United States and the LATAM markets. Our services really revolve around business intelligence, data management, or it encompasses our data governance program, change management, delivery management, education, and training. Some of our partners are AWS, Tableau, Informatica, Microsoft Azure, Matillion, Cloudera, Alteryx, which we've been Partner of the Year for several years, as well as Alation, which is the topic of our conversation today. So let's start a little bit about what I would call wasted time. So anybody who's worked in any organization around data and has to use data understands the reality of wasted time. So this can happen in many different ways. A lack of inability to discover the right data that you want, discovering data that you really don't need, but it kind of resembles the data that you think you need, as well as probably data that's not very good, that hasn't been cleaned, is disorganized. And so statistics tell us that 37% of all analysts spend their time looking for the right data. Per week, that's about 26 hours they also spend on manual spreadsheet tasks if they don't have the right tools. And they also spend about 60% of their time just trying to clean and organize the data. Now, if you add all that up, that's quite a bit amount of time that's used for things that are not really take away from the efficiencies of the data analyst. So over 90% of a data analyst's time is spent on finding, cleaning, and organizing data, with less than 10% on actual analysis. So the ROI amount of time that you're going to spend on your actual duties that are going to return an ROI to your organization is 10%, and 90% is spent truly on areas that should be areas that an analyst should not spend their time on, or at least not as much as they're spending their time on. So let's move on and talk a little bit about Alation, what Alation is, and why we feel that Alation is one of the core products around the data governance market and really around solving data governance problems. So let's start a little bit from a high level. So Alation is a proven global organization. It has over 500 plus enterprise customers. 35% of these are in the Fortune 100. They have a very strong ecosystem. They have over 60 partners worldwide, numerous technology partners. Not only that, but they're an industry leader. They've been named a leader in data governance solutions by Forrester Wave in Q3 of 23. They're also the 3-time Snowflake Data Governance Partner of the Year. So they're very, very closely integrated with Snowflake as a data warehouse. The value-driven solutions that they bring to the table really revolve everything around that we're going to discuss today. Active data governance, metadata management, compliance, self-service analytics, privacy, etc. So all these are key areas that drive the Alation value solution. Also, from a side note, in terms of growth, Alation has experienced huge growth. They're valued currently at about 1.7 billion. They've had numerous funding phases. They've had 340 million in VC funding recently raised. They've achieved over 100 million. They also have what they refer to as 800 plus Alationauts. So their growth is is expanding at a rapid pace. But more than anything, they're a market leader in this area, an area that is very important to most organizations, if not all. So now we're going to get into the meat of our presentation. I'm going to discuss what active data governance is at a high level, and then I'm going to drop into what data strategy is, and then go into data policies. And after that section, we'll take a short break before we start the demo on data policies. So what is Alation's active data governance? So Alation's active data governance really is a framework that addresses, I would say, most of what data governance needs to be addressed, but leveraging Alation. So these, you can see these as steps, obviously, but at the same time, some of these steps are going to be intertwined. So even though it follows a circular pattern, some of these steps can be done in unison. So it's not something that has to be seen as step 1, step 2, step 3, but we do have a first step though, and that would be the establish the governance framework. So this is probably one of the key areas, and an area that probably sits outside of, I would say, Alation, because this is where you're going to discuss your vision and your mission. It's going to be where you develop your data strategy, how your people are going to be organized from an operating model for your data governance. But it's probably one of the key steps, if not the key step, right? Because it's going to really establish how your catalog is going to be organized, how it's going to be empower its users. Without that first step, the next steps become very difficult. But after establishing your governance framework, you move on to populating the data catalog. Once you've decided and when you've looked at what the strategy is going to be, understand what that operating model is going to be, understand the data domains you're going to be using, then you go into how you're going to populate that data catalog. In other words, how you're going to ingest the metadata, analyze it, determining the categories of that data, the domains, what are the characteristics of the data, and the privacy details. The second step is empowering the data stewards. So this step is really where, the people that are going to really work within a tool on a day-to-day basis. They're going to be the individuals that are really going to identify the data, curate the data. They're going to develop the workflows. They're going to be given the power in order to do a lot of the areas around Alation, address the needs of users, of both individual users as well as groups, etc. So this step is very key as you move forward. So based upon the data stewards, one of their key roles is going to be curating assets. So that next step, once you understand who the data stewards are, is giving them the ability to curate those assets. So at this step, they're going to establish data policies, standards, terms. They're going to curate the actual objects that they're bringing in. They're going to describe that data. They're going to apply trust flags. They're going to document any data quality rules that may apply to each of the individual data sets, the tables, the schemas, the objects, etc. Once the curation process starts and that step has begun, you move on to apply the policies and controls. So implementing the policies and controls, generating the different lineage charts, building any rules or reports that may be needed for the data at the quality level, enabling the workflows for those objects, the glossary terms, policies around that. Once those key steps are done, then you can really start looking at collaboration within the community of your organization, within the people that are going to be the first users of Alation. So at this point, you definitely want to leverage the knowledge around your organization. You want to address any questions that people may have. You want to start those conversations, really start pushing Alation, throughout your organization, really champion it. And you also want to determine whether the data that you're bringing in is fit for purpose, the intended use for both the users that are going to be obviously using it, but as well as any use cases that may arise in that process. The last step is the important one because at this step you're going to measure how successful Alation is. So you're going to determine, what the current uh, how much curation has occurred within your data sets. You're going to measure the usage of your data. How often are people going in and using it? How many assets are being created? A good place would be like looking at your business glossary. How many new terms are being added to your business glossary? And then running audit reports around this. So this will be a key area to really, this will enable you to understand, okay, where are we successful, where we're not, and really address those areas that you're not successful. So active data governance, even though it's a framework that was established by Alation itself, is really tied to other frameworks. So it has aspects of DAMA. So if you're familiar with DAMA and DCAM, these are two high-level frameworks, very popular frameworks. But active data governance takes from both those frameworks, as it does from the DGI framework and some new frameworks from individuals that have come out recently, such as a data governance framework from Kim Weinzer. So all these areas, these frameworks, active data governance touches upon all of them. Now, obviously, a caveat here is that active data governance doesn't go into the depth that, say, as a DCAM does. So, I mean, DCAM is definitely, for example, or DAMA, are definitely very in-depth frameworks that go very deep into a lot of different areas around data governance. They might even go into cybersecurity. They'll go into data architecture. They go into a lot of areas that active data governance doesn't so much touch upon, but it does take away from some of these key frameworks in order to really address the data governance they want to apply within Alation. But definitely, if you wanted to look at these other frameworks as well and bring them in, they're already you'll be using aspects of it. You'll notice you will be as you really start applying active data governance within Alation. The next section that we're going to discuss is data strategy and vision. So this is that first step that we just saw within the active data governance framework. And this step, as I mentioned before, is really key, right? Because it's going to really without a strategy, without an ability to describe your program, establish the mission, define the goals of the program, it doesn't matter what tool you get. It doesn't matter, if you have no tool. If you don't do this first step, you'll be very, very difficult for you to promote your program, really get it off the ground, and really have champions that are going to support the program throughout its life cycle. So going back to the active data governance framework, we're going to really address in this area that first step here, the establish the governance framework, set the vision and the mission, and organize what data governance is going to look like. So the first step is the vision, mission, and strategy of data governance. Now, here we're going to define a little bit. We're not going to develop obviously a strategy or an actual mission and vision, but we're going to give you kind of the steps you want to follow to establish those. So the first thing you really want to do is have a vision. What is the vision of what you intend to do? And the vision can be really addressed by understanding the direction. So the direction of where you want to take your data governance program. So it could be as simple as we intend to define all our terms for X, Y, and Z organization or for X, Y, and Z departments as an example of a vision. We want to ensure that that data is available to all our data scientists. So that can be, you can establish that as your vision. After that, you want to look at what the mission is, and this establishes the outcomes to reach the vision. So what are the steps you need to take in order to reach that vision? So if you're saying, okay, our vision is to make sure that we define, catalog all the data from our organization, what will be the steps that you take in order to reach that vision? That, in essence, is what your mission is. And the strategy defines the path for the journey. In other words, it's almost like the playbook at that point. The strategy will tell you who's doing what, here's the framework, etc. That really will enable you to address both the vision and the mission and be able to accomplish those goals. Let's dive a little bit more into the vision of a data governance program. So when you're establishing a data governance program, you want to establish a framework, as I mentioned earlier, around vision, mission, and the aspects of what people are doing. So the vision should be something that you're looking at, trying to get to in the next 2 years. Sometimes it can be a bit longer. you can push it out about 3 years, but you really don't want to go beyond that for the simple reason that uh, uh, when you go beyond 2 or 3 years, you're starting to lack of enthusiasm may seep in, complacency. So you really want to keep that enthusiasm going. So you really want to ensure that whatever you're aspiring to do, it can be accomplished within those 2 or 3 years. Um, Next step is intend to drive your alignment really across the organization. So you want to align with your whole organization, with the stakeholders and your ecosystems. You don't want to be sitting outside of having, regardless if the ideas could be great, not really aligned with what your organization wants to accomplish. So, it goes back to understanding what your organization is and what their real needs are right now. So, what are those critical needs? Sometimes we call them critical use cases or critical business cases, and so you really want to understand those. So, after that, you really want to paint a picture of the future in a very positive way. Obviously, you don't want to be negative. So you want to understand what the current state is. So you want to kind of show, okay, here's where we're at today, and here's where we want to be in the future. When you paint it in that way, people can see a trajectory, a trend towards something that's going to be address the needs of the organization going forward. So some considerations to think about when you're looking at data governance, and some of these you might be familiar with. One of the first ones, and it's not intended to be the first one, but it's something that obviously we live in a very regulatory, world. There's regulations all the time. I don't have to tell anybody, you've got everything from, Sarbanes-Oxley, GLBA, you got PI requirements, you have GDPR, CCPA, and you have other nations also really getting into the regulatory environment around data. That's become a very hot topic, and I think it'll continue to be. And you're seeing these really around recent cybersecurity problems that we're having. Recent organizations have been hacked. So the regulatory environment we see is just going to increase. So that regulatory environment, as it increases and more regulations come down the pipeline, is really going to represent opportunities for data governance folks. These opportunities obviously are gonna require new implementation of tools, of policies, processes in order to address these new regulations based upon what's happening in the world. So there's opportunities that are coming, and because of these regulations, so these opportunities will enable data governance departments really to add both the skills and the technology they need going forward. The other thing you want to consider, obviously, when you're looking at data governance, is data itself. So when you're thinking of data, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the volume of data. Data is growing at a rapid pace. It's doubling constantly. It's I think I don't know. Last projections are way beyond the trillions in terms of data being produced annually, and so this is also not only increasing the requirements around data governance. Um, but it also requires us to understand the range of the data, the depth, the quality of the data. These are all aspects that we need to understand about data as it grows. So it's not just volume, but the volume is increasing our need to really address other areas of the data where before, if we didn't have that much data, obviously it was manageable, but now things are requiring us to really take a broad look at data. And the last one is consider the politicalization of data. And I think this ties back to the regulatory environment. Um, the politics around data, and I think you're seeing the politics really around recently, I think around cybersecurity with the recent there's always obviously hacking going on, but the recent one in Las Vegas around the MGM is a classic example of data being hacked, systems going down, causing a lot of problems for business, for industries, different industries. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And I think that's going to those examples that are happening are really going to drive the political discussion around data. And I think as privacy issues become more apparent, people wanting to control their data more and more, that's going to play also another big role in what we can and cannot do with data within any organization. So here's some questions to ask when you're thinking about data today within your own organization. And remember, always think about what we can accomplish in 2 years, 2 to 3 years, when you ask these questions, because you don't want to ask, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z. That's so far out that's not realistic. So when you're thinking about the data today, you're thinking about what works, what is working today. So there's probably some good use cases that show the successes that you're having with your data. At the same time, there's also areas that you need to address. So what needs to be done differently? So you're going to find things in your organization that, maybe the transformation process is taking too long. Maybe the loading of data from one application to another not only takes long, but is has some problems in terms of not loading complete data. So those are just a couple of examples of what can be done differently. And then another key question is, what do you need to support today, the business today, when it comes to data? So from their standpoint, maybe there's a reporting issue, or maybe there's um, a data requirement or a data need in terms of new models that need to be built really to show a better return on investment. Or you can have other issues around, obviously AI has become now a hot topic. And so those areas might be areas that are needed to be supported. Um, and another key question is, what are the capabilities that need to be fixed, optimized, or innovated? And I think I touched a little bit upon that before, but you may have problems in your data pipelines. Um, they may be dropping data, or the quality of the data might be not sufficient, or people may not know what data exists, or may not understand the lineage of the data or the context of the data. So those are some of the areas. And then obviously the innovative aspect is, it's hard to get innovative when you don't have the right data at the right time. So innovation is wonderful, but without the right data at the right time and the right quality, it becomes very difficult. And then a final question you may ask is, what else do we need to think about regarding our data? So there are going to be things that sit outside, of what's been thought before around your data that may address both innovation, or may address, something that's missing. So the pitch and the vision. So when you're developing a pitch, it's almost like it is your vision statement in essence, but it really enables you to sell your program, both internally, and as well as with people that may sit outside of your organization. So a common definition, sometimes we talk about data, is data governance is the people, the process, and technology. You've heard that before, that enable delivery of the right data to the right people at the right time to allow data driven decisions based upon trusted information. So that is a common definition you'll hear about, and hear about data governance, how it's defined. But every pitch can be slightly different, or completely different for that matter. It really depends on your organization and what the goals of your organization are. So, but that's an example of what a pitch would look like. It's a classical definition of data governance. The second area is the vision. So, with data governance, you want to establish and share the capabilities, processes, and technologies to address. So, here are some aspects of what you may want to look at: data lifecycle, the retention of data, data quality, making sure you're aligned with data security, uh, trusted definitions. How good is the data? Can you trust it? And is the data being appropriately used? Now, the vision these are examples of a vision, but within your organization, that vision can add other areas that are not listed, such as, for example, data ethics or data lineage, um, etc. So it's this is just an example, but I think some of these examples can be repurposed for your organization. So the mission of data governance, this is where from the vision you go to the mission, and this is where we want to start establishing the program, establishing the framework. What is that going to look like? So the mission are the key areas of focus to achieve the vision. The mission is meant to be aligned. So you want to be aligned with the business. You want to define the steps that you're going to take in order to achieve the mission. Um, you want to make sure that that mission is used by your team on a continuous basis. It's not something that just sits on a piece of paper, but obviously this can be electronic. But it's something that can be shared with other team members, stakeholders, as well as um, other people in your organization that may not be aware of it. So it's something that's very critical to definitely the success of your program as you move forward. So some questions to ask when you're developing your mission is it helping to realize the vision? So that's basic, because you want the mission to align with the vision. You don't want there to be any kind of division between them, any misalignment, because if you get that, it's your program's going to suffer. You also want to understand, can you accomplish what's being stated? If you can't, then obviously that's not a good mission statement. You want to build details that meet that data governance vision. So there's another aspect of aligning with that vision, making sure that they're both aligned, so that one builds upon the other. Next one, is it a real, is it tangible, or is it something that really cannot be met? So it has to be realistic. Um, and will it create the greatest return for your data? Does it have that highest regard for your data? Um, and that's I would say something that, you really want to think about that, because sometimes we lose traction, we lose kind of like, um, specificity when we start developing mission statements, that we forget that, okay, does this really address what we need for data? So some of the things you may want to include with your mission statement, um, some outcomes, so you prove that it's working, the data governance program. Some criteria. You want to build some of those details, as mentioned before, into your vision. Um, you wanna be big, definitely. You want to be bold. You definitely want to always aim for being the best. I wouldn't say best, but uh, I would say probably always continuously improving is something I like to use. And then you also want to make sure that your mission statement is marketable. Is it engaging? Is it exciting? It's not something that's dull, because it definitely is part of your whole package when you're selling to other people within your organization. So here's an example of data governance mission. So you want to make sure that your data governance mission establishes data owners for classes and specific data objects. You want to define centrally how your data is being handled. You want to introduce data quality monitoring and maintenance. You want to provide the right tools and access, to the people within your organization. You want to establish and promote the ethical use of data. You definitely don't want people that should not have access to data gain access to it, especially in the regulatory environments we currently live in. You want to train and expand knowledge in data matters across the organization, as part of your mission. Because what's the purpose of data if it doesn't expand the knowledge of your organization and give you a higher return on investment? So that's that. Of all those points, I truly feel that's probably one of the most important, because it goes back to, why are we here? We're here because the organization creates data and needs data in order to make better decision making, and depending on your industry, in order to obviously increase revenue, if you're in the private sector. So it's really a strong point that I can't emphasize more. So next section is, we're going to discuss a little bit about SMART goals for data governance. So SMART goals are targets that establish and push your program to new levels, to ensure that you can really um, review it and see, okay, and verify that you're being successful. It's So your SMART goals tend to change over time. They can get reprioritized at times, so they're flexible, but they're really good actionable targets that really allow you to measure how successful you're going to be, or you are being, with your program. So a little bit about SMART goals. So what does SMART stand for? So it's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So specific is what needs to be done. It's the word says it itself. You want to be exact on what needs to be done. You want to be able to measure what is occurring. You also want to be realistic. In other words, you want to be, is it achievable? Can you achieve what is being asked for in the time that's being allowed? Because if you can't, then already you're starting out with something that's unrealistic. And obviously, this ties back to the point we're constantly making. Is it relevant? Does it go back to the mission and the vision, why we're even here? And is it within a certain specified time? So do we have, like we talked about, the 2 and 3 years before? And so we really definitely want the goal to be time bound within something that's realistic as well. So here we ask around the SMART goals: the who, the what, the when, the why, and the how. So who will take ownership of the action or task within of that SMART goal? What is the need to support the vision? When will these items be addressed? Why are these items important to vision? And how do we determine success of the SMART goal? So these are really the key, the classical wise of how we're going to accomplish those SMART goals. And here's an example of some goals that can be advanced by data governance. Obviously, this is not the end all, but these are just some examples. I'll point some out. So a good one, in my opinion, is being able to establish your stewards and owners. In this example, it's in the pilot, but just overall, establishing your data stewards and your owners for your data sets is very crucial for your data governance, because without that ownership um, for your data, people don't know who to turn to if they want to understand both the context, understand the context of the data, understand who's responsible for it. If there's problems with the data, who do they turn to? If they want to get access to the data as well. So to me, that's a really good goal to establish, and metrics to put around as you build out your program. A couple other ones you may want to consider are more technical in nature. They tend to be things around connecting and configuring to data sources. That's very common. And here we have an example of Snowflake. Also, your BI environment. So those are examples from a technical standpoint that you may want to consider to put in there as well. And then another one specifically really around Alation is the curation of objects, is something you may want to definitely want to consider and put in. How many objects have been curated by since the implementation of your application? How much is done by steward? How much is done weekly or monthly? So those are good. That's a good metric to definitely have in your program. The next section we're going to discuss is data policies. After this section, we're going to have a demo and then take a short break. But this will be the first section we're going to address within the Alation environment. After I've explained a little bit about what data policies are, Sean will step in and run the demo for us on how data policies are both developed, initiated, and used within Alation. So data policies, and then I referred to earlier, and you see a couple of highlights here across 4 sections. And earlier, when I explained the active data governance framework, I explained it around there is steps like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, but they don't always go in a uniform manner. In other words, when you're dealing with policies, these policies will address different areas, and maybe when they implement those policies, they're going to address these different areas at the same time. So that's why when you see these different highlights and you say, oh, policies are addressing both the populate the data catalog, curate the assets, apply policies and controls, and monitor and measure, is because this section policies, when you really start implementing, are really going to address multiple areas of your active data governance framework. So real quick, what policy terminology is. Um, so what is a policy? So we can talk about long-winded definitions, but here I think a visual probably plays a little bit better into the discussion. That is, policy is really around compliance and how it drives into other areas. So you can have policies that address rules and regulations, standards, privacy, standard operating procedures, transparency controls, etc. So policies should be thought of at sort of at the highest level of when you're developing, and I'm going to call them rules, I would say. But when you're developing rules for anything, the policy is the highest level of a rule. Um, that's how I kind of think about it. Before and below that, you'll have like possibly standards, an operating procedure, et cetera. But in essence, policy really dictates everything at a high level, what needs to be done. And for data governance and how it's applied to data, this is going to be really crucial as you move forward with your program. So Gartner has a couple of different areas in terms of kind of policy types that can be used. You can have policies for quality, privacy, security, ethics, definitions, models, policies for life cycle. So the policies, you can have policies for numerous different areas. This is just an example, but you can have other examples as well. Not just in these areas, but other areas. For example, access policies is a very popular area that sits sometimes outside of security. But these are some of the key policy types that you can manage, monitor, and then apply within your program. So we talked a little bit about policies when we looked at policies, how they address different areas. This is a policy hierarchy. In a policy hierarchy, we have the traditional triangle where we have five different sections. So we have our general policies, and when I talked about earlier about how policies are at the highest level, this is what I was referring to. And then you have standards, and after standards, you may have policies that are very particular to a certain area. In this case, you have a data policy, but the data policy is always a subordinate to the general policies and the standards of your organization. After which you have controls, and then audit. So controls are kind of like the rules of the policy, how each of the areas of the policy gets applied within, in this case, data. So as you look at these arrows going up, so from all the way from the top to the bottom, we're looking at general policy, standards, data policy, controls, and audit. How they're the creation, the curation, upkeep. All of these sections follow that process. They follow the creation, the curation, and the upkeep of policy standards across an organization, and then the automation of those policies and the lineage of them. So when we're talking about policies, in particular, we're talking about data in this section, data policies. We really some key areas to talk about data policies are around these six pillars: data security, privacy, compliance, data enablement, data ops, and data quality. These are key areas, and each of these areas around policy um, tend to have um, very similar procedures. So there's going to be around the policy. You're going to have it's going to direct itself to metadata. How metadata is used. It's going to have terms that support it within glossaries. It's going to have a lineage, and then there's going to be analytics that support it. So when you look at this, referred to as a house of data, looking at data leadership and data architecture on the bottom, these are the key pillars that we want to have and address within our data policies. These will help you ensure that your program's successful. And then within each of these pillars, you're going to address from a policy standpoint, you're going to address those areas around metadata, around terms, definitions, and you're going to have analytics to support how those policies are being complied to. So, for some key principles to remember when we're talking about policy, and these come from Robert Seiner, who is a data governance guru. So the first one is data as an asset. Um, the second is data as a clear process and procedure. Data includes accountability, and data quality is all obviously important, and it should be embedded. So data as an asset is something that did not have a lot of awareness before, but really over the last, I would say, I don't know, 5, 6 years, you've really seen a movement to consider data. And you may have heard this term before: data is the new oil. Um, you've also there's people out there, Douglas Laney, for example, who talks about data. Um, um, Infonomics, it's his term that he uses, but data that can be monetized, the monetization of data. So, and data has to be viewed very differently than it was before. It's a reusable asset. It can be used both to address regulatory requirements, but the obvious one is to make money. The return on investment. What is that return on investment on data? And so data should be treated like any other asset. It should not be treated like, oh, it's has no value, or it's not important, but it should be definitely treated with such high value. Obviously, you see, if you've noticed in the news over the last years, all the hacks that have occurred over the last 10 years, and the cost of those hacks, those breaches that have plagued companies. So we definitely seeing this movement to treat data as an asset, much like you would treat it like a piece of equipment if you were a manufacturing firm, but maybe even more, because data is something that's in a way renewable on a consistent basis, because it can be used for many different things. So it may even have even more value than that. So data, the second one is data having clear processes and procedures. So um, that is, I think, self-explanatory, because if there isn't any process or procedures around anything, it's going to fall apart. And data is definitely has to have that. This is where without those processes and procedures, you don't know where your data is. You don't know who's responsible for the data. You don't understand why the data is transformed, why the data is kept in certain areas, who has access to it. So processes and procedures are obviously very clear and need to be very clear, and they need to definitely be addressed. So data has to include accountability. So at the accountability phase, you're really looking at who's accountable for the data, who's the owner, who's the steward, who has that responsibility for ensuring that the data is secure, um, curated. Without that, the data is useless because then it can just sit without having someone who's accountable and someone who is going to apply the necessary principles to the data and the necessary governance to the data. And the last one is data quality. Sometimes we say that's obvious, but having the right data at the right time, um, and data that is correct is very important. So data quality plays a huge role in that. It has to be there from the beginning. It can't be an afterthought. We can't assume that our data has the highest level of quality. We have to always ensure that the data is being checked, that there's metrics applied to it, that there's controls around it for our end users. So a lean way in writing a policy. So I know that policy writing is probably not the most popular thing to do. It's obviously can take some time, and sometimes it's difficult to know if you've addressed everything. So in this example, we this template, we're really giving some pointers out to what a policy has, and some of the recommendations. So definitely want a one-line description of what the policy is addressing. You don't want paragraphs after paragraphs because nobody's going to read it. You want to address the reasons for the policy. Be very, very specific about those reasons. The specifics of the policy. What exactly is the policy addressing? And then some links to the policy. If very, very important, specifically if that policy is referring to other policies or other standards, or other areas that may be need to be addressed within the policy. And some recommendations. Short and to the point on when you write it. Communicate it with bullets, tables, pictures, and diagrams as much as possible. I think the less amount of words you use, the better. You want to avoid, as I just said, you want to avoid a lot of text. So not paragraphs of text, but get to the point very quickly and make it easy to understand, but not just understand, but make it easy to be actionable. There's nothing worse than a policy that you're reading and you have no idea what you've read and what you're supposed to do with it. So it has to be something, believe it or not, in this case, the more simpler, the better. Something that's somebody in high school could read. You don't want to make it to the point that you need an attorney to translate it for you, because then you're not going to get any action on that policy. So at this point, I am going to move it over to Sean to do a demo on how policies are addressed within Alation, how you can use policies to curate assets, for example, apply controls, and monitor and measure your program going forward. So let me end the show at this point and move this to Sean Glenn, who's going to now take over from me, and I'll let him do a short introduction of himself and then move to the demo. Sean, it's all yours.
Thanks, Salvador. Hey guys, as Salvador mentioned, my name is Sean Glenn. I've been working with Data Meeting for a couple of years now, and my role is basically a data catalog architect. I'm part of Salvador's data governance team, and have been working with Alation now for probably a year or so. And yeah, looking forward to kind of showing you some of the features, starting with data policies here, as well as some of the other topics we're going to cover here today. Okay, so let's get started here with giving you a little demo on policies and kind of how to the process of cataloging those within your Alation environment, and speak to some ideas about how you can start to apply those to different objects throughout the Alation site. Right now, we're just sitting on our homepage. The best way to go about navigating to your policies, your library of policies, is going to be coming up here to the little apps drawer button here. If we drop that down, you'll see there's an app here called Govern, and this is where your policy center is going to live among a few other objects here, which we'll actually touch on a little bit later on in the webinar. So I'm going to click into policies here. And the first thing you're going to see is basically two main sections. We're going to have up top here your policy groups, and down below the policies themselves. So right away, pretty straightforward. If you're used to working with any sort of glossaries, this is going to kind of follow the same logic here, which is down at the bottom, you're going to start building and creating all of the policies that are going to exist within your organization. But over time, you're going to realize that a lot of these policies are going to start to be related to each other in some way. If you remember back to the slide Salvador had shared before, a lot of those are going to come back to something along the lines as what we saw with the Gartner categories when it comes to policies. So you can see we've kind of got a lot of those already embedded into our environment. I'm sure in your environment, you're going to have something similar, or it's going to branch off into different types of groups or expand upon those. But you can see in our environment, it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. So as you start to create these, definitely going to be helpful to start to group these into groups so that you can kind of start to see all of the related policies. So if anyone is browsing, trying to get an understanding of the policies to be aware of, if they're looking for policies in a particular area, having these groups is going to allow them to kind of sift through those a little bit more efficiently. And any of your browsers or any of your viewers on your Alation site are going to have access to this so they can kind of educate themselves, or you can help point them to this page so they can kind of get an understanding if they're looking to use a particular object. Hey, here's what you're going to need to be aware of. I'll click into a policy here just to kind of give you an example of what a page is going to look like. The bulk of this page is really always going to be the main description section here, starting to list out a lot of those bullets that Salvador had just had just went over, right? Trying to let your end users understand, hey, exactly what is this policy? What is it all about? What's its purpose? As well as listing out exactly some of the statements that are going to be involved in what you're going to have to adhere to. Just like any other page that you're going to come to throughout the catalog site, you're going to have a whole column here on the right-hand side that's going to allow you to start to kind of further classify and label and build out some extra content that's going to be helpful for the user to understand. Definitely going to be important to have some sort of steward or owner that's going to be assigned to this policy so users know who to reach out to if they have any other further questions or concerns or maybe some suggestions. It's also just good to have it's good assurance to know that someone's also in charge, as over time there might need to be changes and tweaks made to this policy, whether it's just internal decisions with your company, or there might be perhaps policies that your company needs to adhere to based on city, state, or federal laws. So obviously policies are going to trickle down into that area, and you're going to need to make sure that your policies reflect those of those government entities. And so you're going to have to make those changes. So making sure someone's in charge of that's keeping up with that is going to be important. Another thing similar to other object types throughout the Alation instance is you do have the ability to start to customize this out a little bit. In this case, our policy template right now, you can see it's just called type. It's just the out of the box policy template, but you have the ability to build different layouts that might fit a little bit better for the needs of your particular policy type. So thinking about those policy groups, you might have a series of policies that are all going to need to follow the same type of format to help just make it easier for your users to come in and pick up on certain sections that they're looking for or need to be aware about. So just know when you come here, the description section itself is pretty robust, where you can start to kind of build this out in a way that's easy on the eye to read, whether it's just having headers or bullets. You can actually start to build in or embed tables, videos, and other external links all there to kind of just give as much information to your end user as possible so they can really answer their own questions and have a clear understanding of what this policy is all about and to what objects they're going to need to be aware of, to what objects this is going to apply to. Speaking of those objects, down here in the bottom right corner, this is a great way to start to get a sense of, hey, what are all of the objects that this policy is currently being applied to, and allows you to actually just start to, these are all hyperlinked for you to quickly jump to those if you're looking to browse for a particular object there. Another key thing in terms of the governance side of this, right? It is important throughout your Alation site to make sure you kind of have full control over what objects are allowed to be edited and by which users are, and which users are allowed to edit those. Obviously, policies are going to be something that you're going to, if there's ever going to be any changes need to be made to, you want to make sure there's only select users who have been approved to actually manage those. You don't want any person to come in here and make their own tweaks like it's a Wikipedia page. You kind of want to have this a little bit more locked down. And in this top right corner here, you're going to have the option to actually update your access settings. And so you can see here at the moment, in our case, we've got this set to public, which is actually being inherited by the from the policy group. You have the option to toggle this on or off. Best recommendation always to just leave that on if you're going to push that to a policy group. But in general, I would say, though we have public set up here where anyone can come in and edit and view, you're most likely going to want to have this actually switch to being in this middle option here, which is going to be edited restriction, which allows you to, and let me actually switch over and show you if I switch to the group here. Let's do this. I manage the policy group access settings, and I click into the middle option here and make this edited restriction. Now this is going to update to allow any user to still come to this page, as well as any of the child private policies that are part of this group, to be able to see what the policies are and read into those, so they can still come here and get an understanding of what each policy is. But now we have the ability to actually set who are the actual users who are going to be able to edit this particular policy group or any of the policies that are going to be sitting within this group. So definitely a feature that you want to take advantage of as you're building out your library of policies, so that nothing is going to get changed without going through the appropriate approval process. You do have the option to make this fully private if there are certain policies or groups of policies that you want to have just kind of kept to a particular set of users. In general, right, the Alation catalog and catalogs in general, the goal there is to try and help end users find everything that's available to them. But obviously, there's still going to be certain objects or things that are just really not related to particular users. So to help remove, perhaps remove some clutter from the site, this could be an option that you look into. But I find in most cases that the editing restricted option there is going to be your best bet. Okay, in terms of actually, once you've built out your policy and you've kind of updated all the context in terms of the description and as well as some of these labels here on the side, what you're probably going to next want to do is actually start applying these particular objects. So as any user is browsing throughout the site, as they come to any object page, let's say they're looking at a particular table and they're thinking about actually using this for some sort of project, some sort of task, maybe embedding that as an input for a workflow that they're building out, right? It's probably going to be smart for them to be aware of any policies that are attached to that. So if I click in, I think this is one that I have an example on, actually, might not be the best. Let me go back. So if I come back to my PII, right, personal identifiable information, right, I want to make sure if there's any tables that are having any of that information, right, date of birth, passport numbers, driver license numbers, right, all of that sensitive information, I want to make sure that that has been applied to the particular table or in any of those objects that it should be. So one way to do that, there's a couple of manual ways. I find the best way to go about it is actually just coming to this page. If, let's say I'm in charge of this particular table, hey, I know there's sensitive information in here. And so if anyone else wants to use this table, I need to make sure that they're aware that there is sensitive information in there. You can obviously take advantage of the description section and actually write that out yourself. There's also different ways you can start to tag, right? So I can actually embed, and maybe if I'm writing this sentence out, say, hey, be aware this table contains, and I might just leave it at that and kind of embed that as part of the sentence there. So now this is going to be kind of front and center, as well as a hyperlink to allow that person to jump to the policy page itself if they're not aware of what that actually entails. I find the policy section over here on the right is also one of the best ways to kind of start to call out any of those policies. Sometimes these description sections can become pretty lengthy, and thus it's kind of hard if users don't actually scan the whole thing carefully line by line and really comprehend what the description's all about. And so something as important as a policy regarding personal identifiable information, you definitely don't want that to be lost. So sometimes this right-hand column here, it definitely allows some of those labels and classifications and certain policies and definitely policies, those kind of stand out and pop out here on the page a little bit more. So anyone who has the ability to come into this page and actually make updates to this page is going to have the ability to actually update the policy section here. And you can see we've got a few different policies. If I wanted to add another one, it would be just as simple as just clicking that one. And there you go. And now we have 2 policies applied to this page. So that's an example of how you can come to any object page and start applying policies there. There is also the ability to kind of do this a little bit more in bulk from a manual perspective, where if I come to an advanced search and I'm going to select off a number of items here, I have the ability to actually, well, in this case, add or remove policies. So if you're performing an advanced search with a number of filters here, you want to apply a blanket policy to all of those search results. This is a place where you can come to and actually apply those, kind of speed up the process instead of going one by one. But there is another way where you can kind of start to, if you remember the slide with the Salvador had shared with the pyramid and the types of policies, right? One of those red arrows on the side kind of talked about automation. And there is some of that capability here within the Alation site. And so I'm going to show you that now. If I come back to, actually, I'm going to, if not anyone's going to be able to do this, you're going to need to be at least a catalog admin, but there's something called catalog sets. And basically, this is going to be a place where you can start to build some logic into the Alation site to start to apply context to your objects automatically based on parameters that you set. So we have one here that's existing already relating to this PII policy, right? And so basically what's going on in here is we can create rules that say, in this particular case, we've created this rule for directly for columns, but you can do this at the schema level or at the table level here. And you can say, based on any columns, and so what's going on here is we've got, I want to make sure that all columns throughout all of the tables that we've ingested into our Alation environment, if there's any columns that I think are related to PII, I want to be able to apply and add that policy to that page. Now, as you're ingesting tables, right, you might be connecting to a number of data sources that might have hundreds to thousands of tables, and those tables might have hundreds to thousands of columns, right? So immediately you're trying to figure out, is there a faster way to do this? And catalog sets are going to be your answer in this case. So in this page, this is going to allow me to say, hey, Alation, I want you to go and find all columns throughout my Alation environment that match any of these column headers that I'm placing in here. And in this case, the delimiter here is going to be a little pipe. So you can see anytime there's a table that contains social security numbers, SSN, birth dates, passport, anything regarding to ethnicity or race, right? I only have a handful of in here, but you can obviously keep this list going. I can say, hey, first of all, go find any columns that have this object or have these column headers. Once you've found those, on this second tab here, we're going to say, here's what we're going to tell Alation to start to apply. So in this case, I'm going to say, hey, anything that contains those column headers, I want you to actually apply. In this case, we have 2 different policies that we're applying. You can make it as small as just adding one little item here, or you can actually build out and actually fill out a lot of any of the other fields that you're seeing here that exist in all of those columns or all of those column pages. So if I wanted to make updates to the description, stewards, right, any of that applies. But in this case, I'm interested in particularly adding those policies. I have that capability to do that here. Once you've set that, immediately what you're going to see back on this overview and rules tab is it's going to populate a list of all of the columns that it found. So in this case, our environment's not that huge. And based on the criteria I set, it came back with 5 results. So what's going on here is for all 5 of these columns that Alation found, it is going to automatically apply those policies. And I can see that if I open up, let's say this birth date, right? I can see some of the information here about what table this column sits in, and obviously the rest of the path with regards to schema and data source. If I click on this birth date column, I can see that this has automatically been applied. And I know that it's been automatically applied. If you remember when I was on the table earlier, we did see under the policy section that I had the PII listed, but you'll see one new little icon here that didn't exist before, and that's this little gear icon. So if I hover over that, you'll see that this is an indicator that says this is a policy that has been applied by a particular catalog set, and I can actually jump to that catalog set by using the hyperlink there. So this is a huge feature on the Alation site that definitely is going to be helpful for you to apply those policies to make sure you're really covering all of your bases. Certainly, as you're ingesting all of that volume into your Alation site, this is going to be a great way for you to efficiently start to apply those policies to all of those objects that are going to be related to that policy, so you can make sure that your end users are really getting all of the needed information they're getting as they're browsing throughout your Alation site. So that pretty much covers everything I wanted to share with you guys today. Again, we kind of talked about how to simply just navigate to the policy center and start to build out your policy library, as well as putting those into particular groups to make it easier, to make the search process easier, as well as start to apply these policies to a number of objects, whether that's individually or going through it manually one by one, or actually kind of using an automated process to kind of help expedite the process of applying those policies. So that's all I had for you guys today on the policy.